This is a How Not to Make a Movie podcast special encore presentation to celebrate the resurgence of EC Comics and the anticipated streaming release of Tales from the Crypt in 2025. Was William M. Gaines actually God? Put your money on yes. This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
Did they have a point, though, at least in part? Did they have a point? If there were episodes about cannibalism or whatever, might that have had some sort of negative effect on impressionable young minds?
I have never believed that. I still don't believe it. The stuff that they have in movies and television today is so much worse than anything I ever put out, and I can't see that that ever harmed anybody either. Kids love horror. They love gore. They love all these dreadful things. I have a grandson who just eats this stuff up, and he's about 5 years old, and all he could do is wait for the reprints of my comics because he loves them.
Hello and welcome to what we call in the TV business a very special episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. You want to know the insidest dope there is on Tales from the Crypt? It's this. If there was a real crypt keeper, a kind of ground zero for everything Tales from the Crypt, it was EC Comics publisher William M. Gaines. I grew up a huge fan of Mad Magazine and the EC Comics that preceded it, like Tales from the Crypt. Just reading Mad was like getting a master's class in comedy. At Mad, they celebrated Bill Gaines, the man they worked for, even as they made fun of him. Now, while Bill Gaines didn't write or draw anything himself, he was the writing and the artwork's organizing principle. It may not have flowed from him literally, but it flowed from him nonetheless. EC and Mad both represented the world as Bill Gaines saw it. Back when I was huddled under the blankets with a stack of Tales from the Crypt comic books, it would have seemed a total impossibility that one day I would write and produce the TV version of one of Bill Gaines's creations. It would have seemed an even bigger impossibility that I would get to meet him and get his blessing for my TV version as part of the bargain. And yet that happened. With one or two exceptions, I have never been a star fucker. God, I don't care about stars. But Bill Gaines was one of those exceptions. Meeting him, and I say this as a devout atheist, was like meeting God. And it definitely lived up to the moment. Yeah, Bill Gaines inspired me. You want to color outside the lines? Yeah, go ahead. Fuck the lines. You want to point at the emperor and the fact that he's not wearing any clothes? Point away and make sure to laugh extra loud at his microscopic schween. What, me worry? No, Alfredy, I ain't worrying because you ain't worrying. Perversely and ironically, the fact that Bill Gaines became the person he became was entirely an accident. A series of accidents. Max Gaines, Bill Gaines' father, helped start the comic book business. In the 1930s, he worked for the then fledgling DC Comics. In fact, Max Gaines turned down Jerry Siegel when Jerry Siegel first submitted Superman to DC. Eventually, Max Gaines ended up in advertising, where as part of an ad campaign he did for Buster Brown shoes, he created a series of Buster Brown comic books to be given away with each pair of shoes. That happy accident put Max Gaines back into the comic book business. Next thing you know, Max starts his own comic book company, EC Comics. Max's son Bill had no interest in comics or publishing. He wanted to be a high school science teacher when another accident, this one with a boat, killed Max Gaines and changed the whole direction of Bill Gaines's life. Bill Gaines took over his dad's publishing company, and he changed the company's focus from educational comics to entertaining comics. And he started titles like Tales from the Crypt, The Haunt of Fear, and The Vault of Horror. Like everything good and fun in the 1950s, EC drew the ire of people with no sense of humor. The man was determined that comic books like EC's were destroying America's youth. Bill Gaines went before Congress, not that it did much good.
What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own children? Do we forget that they are citizens too and entitled to the essential freedom to read? Or do we think our children so evil, so vicious, so simple-minded that it takes but a comic magazine story of murder to set them to murder, of robbery to set them to robbery.
Eventually, he turned away from EC and got mad. And if you don't think he changed the world by doing that, I don't know what world you're living in. John Kassir needs no introduction. He's the voice of the Crypt Keeper, of course. But here's the weird thing, and it's a big part of why there will never be a Tales from the Crypt remake. The Crypt Keeper in the EC comic books and the Crypt Keeper in the Tales from the Crypt TV series are not the same character, and therefore not the same intellectual property or IP. The Crypt Keeper that appears in the TV show is completely separate from the EC comics. Bill Gaines' family owns the EC comics. Joel Silver and the other executive producers of Crypt, they own the Crypt Keeper who appears in the TV series. And Bill Gaines' family, how shall I put this? They hate Joel a lot. They believe that Joel ripped them off while doing the TV series. And so the Crypt Keeper and Tales from the Crypt will likely remain divorced from each other forever and ever, alas. It's always us kids who get hurt in the divorce, right? But let's put the subject at hand to John Kassir, the guy who filled Kevin Yeager's magnificent puppet with life.
Bill Gaines. Bill Gaines, man. You know, first of all, a lot of people don't know this. People who know my career and, know my work as the Crypt Keeper and have talked to me at length about it, or been at one of the conventions where I've had my Q&As and talk about growing up with the comic books. How in a kismet irony kind of way, wound up playing the Crypt Keeper for something that I loved as a kid, that was controversial for me to be able to even look at these comic books because, my mother was not a, total conservative mom, but she knew I wasn't supposed to be reading these things. My grandfather had a store when we'd go visit my grandfather in his little store in Springfield, Massachusetts. All my cousins and I had a shitload of them. We'd go down to the store. My grandfather would give us, a pop, soda pop, whatever, ice cream, whatever. And he goes, go pick something off the rack. And my cousins were trying to reach up as high as they could, trying to get Playboy magazines and stuff as little boys would do. I was taking the Tales from the Crypt comic books off the stand. And I used to have these Casper comics that I never read. I think I got them from like a friend down the street or something. I had like one of those, file boxes full of them, and I would use the covers and I'd put them on top of my Tales from the Crypt comic books. And then of course, Mad Magazine was huge when I was in, when I was in elementary school and my friends started bringing in Mad Magazine, or then I got a little older and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a takeoff on Catch-22. We got to go see that movie. We would go see the movies that were being sent up in Mad Magazine just because they were being sent up in Mad Magazine, probably ones that we probably even shouldn't have been seeing either. But just so great. And
a lot of my sense of comic timing, really, I think it comes from that magazine. It was impeccable. The musical parodies, for instance.
Oh, forget it.
Just wonderful.
Great stuff. And the Tales from the Crypt comic books, you look at those. Correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the people have told me, that were involved with production with Tales from the Crypt, they would use the actual comic book almost like a storyboard for how they would, shoot certain things. Each frame of that. Certainly, when you look at any kind of horror magazine, pulp fiction, movie, this kind of thing, they all borrowed from the artists that were in these magazines, which was incredible. But a quick story about William Gaines, how devoted he was to his fans and the kids. Dear friend of mine, Ari Gross, who we all know as an actor, was in New York with a friend, and they're walking down the street, and I think he said they were like, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that, and they see EC Comics building that says EC Comics offices, and they just let themselves in and walked upstairs, and they go, "Hey, how can we help you?" You go, "Oh, we love this comic book." The next thing I know, they're in Bill Gaines's office being given comic books, and he's telling them all about it. And I'm abridging it much because I don't remember all the details, because my mouth was probably hanging open when he was telling me this story. But it's such a wonderful story. Sometime we'll have to have him relate that to us. But that's the kind of thing that I got to experience with Mr. Gaines when we did the show, and I didn't have that much access to him a couple of times, but I do remember meeting him when we were doing the Crypt Jam. And he came down and did the little thing with Chucky Booker, who wrote the Crypt Jam, and he and I were like, "Whoa," doing the thing. And somehow we got into some conversation. I don't know if it was that night or some other time. He invited me to his house, and I walked in to see bookcases. Like, his living room were bookcases that were like a maze, and they were all scripts and comic books and that kind of thing. This is what I'm remembering, folks. But this is, this could have been complete fantasy. It could be fiction, but I really remember it to be completely true.
Where was his house in this case?
I can't remember.
East Coast, West Coast.
Here. I mean, I've been living all the time that I've been doing Tales from the Crypt. I've been living in Los Angeles. I moved here in 1986 from New York, and I've been out here ever since. He just loved what we did with the show. He loved it from top to bottom. I'm sure he had the same problems everybody else did with dealing with the budget and the production people, from the top, and that kind of stuff that we don't hesitate to talk about, which is why we don't have the rights anymore.
And then there's that.
Yeah. But certainly he's very fondly remembered by his family. I've been contacted by his daughter a number of times. Wendy, yes. She would contact me whenever she would have a new grandchild, or one of Bill's great grandchildren, or the great great grandchild of Bill's dad, who started it. And they really are into the family history of everything that was created, and asked me to do a little voiceover or a little video for the kid to have as a keepsake of the Crypt Keeper welcoming them into the world. Which is just the most amazing thing. Who would be honored with such a thing? So, that the William Gaines history is deep in my bones. Yes, my breaking, cackling little bones. And I have nothing but great things to say about my experience with Bill Gaines. I wouldn't pretend to be a historian on his whole history and background and who he was, but certainly had enough experience to know what a great legacy we're a part of.
I proudly accept this great honor on behalf of my unbelievably talented staff of editors, writers, and artists who were vilified in the early 50s by a Senate subcommittee on juvenile delinquency and by other magazine publishers who claimed we had destroyed the youth of America. It has taken almost 40 years for our work to be recognized. I thank Joel Silver and his incredible group of movie makers who have made Tales from the Crypt the hottest and most successful original programming in home box office history. Finally, I thank the board of directors of the Horror Hall of Fame for this delightful vindication of our efforts.
Before each and every episode of Tales from the Crypt Keeper would open his big book of stories to that episode's comic book cover. Comic book artist Mike Vosberg, Voz, drew every single one of them. If anyone at Crypt was trying to mine their inner Bill Gaines for inspiration, it was Voz.
Back in the early 60s, there were these little paperbacks that were put out of Mad comic books, and geez, what they were called, but that was my first time that I saw those Mad comics, and I was just like, it was like, wow, it's um,
What he did in the paperbacks is he was simply republishing the same material he put in the comic book format.
right, in repackaging them.
Right. Which was also a part of his genius, that he would repackage the same material several times and we would happily buy it.
Well, I guess if you're familiar with comic book history, that was a common thing with publishers. It's like, that's why they didn't give the original artwork back, because they didn't want you giving it to another publisher and I'm going like, oh yeah, I can print this. So, but yeah, I remember getting those. I must have been about 11 or 12. And my two favorite artists were always Jack Davis and Wally Wood.
What struck you about both of them? What was it about Wally Wood and what was it about Jack Davis that drew your eye?
With Jack Davis, it was like they were the silliest drawings in the world, and not only did he do Mad comics, but he used to do at the time, he did these little things called Funny Valentines, and it was an education for me because I was suddenly recognizing artists. So when I saw the Valentine's cards, I'm going, oh, that's Jack Davis. Of course, I guess the fact that he signed all this stuff was helpful too. But it was the other artist for me was Wally Wood. He drew the most amazing women in his comic books, and I'm sure it's like just starting puberty about then. It was like, wow, these are neat comics. It's and I remember meeting him a couple times. Later on when I started working on, he died fairly young. He had kidney disease. And
what was it like meeting a hero? It can be great. It can be less than great.
He was in his kind of his last stages of just alcoholism and whatever. But I mean, it was exciting, but it was also kind of like, it was, I remember, I had a friend that another Alan, who was an editor at Marvel Comics. That I knew him since the time he was like 13, 14 years old, because he lived here in Detroit. But he was telling me, he said, "Yeah, I showed some of your work to Wally Wood," and he goes, "Wow, this guy draws women almost as well as I do." And I remember my youthful arrogance. I'm going, almost.
Oh dear. But hey, I mean, on the one hand, wow, what a great compliment.
It was a nice compliment. It's Jack Davis I never did get to meet, or talk to, because he's someone I would have loved to. But I mean, there were other great guys in those books too, like John Severin, and who's the other one? Bill Elder. I'm trying to think who else. They're very artists, but I remember for me it was always the Wood and Jack Davis were the first ones, and the stories were so funny because I was familiar with all those comics. So seeing the satires on them were perfect for me. Probably 3 or 4 years later, they came out with some of the science fiction ones. And that was another just revelation because I got to see Al Williamson and Frank Frazetta and God, who else? More Wally Wood. And in fact, my Joe Orlando, who used to be my editor when I first started in comics. One of the great EC stories I always think of is they were taking Ray Bradbury's stories and adapting them, and had no idea he was a big comic book fan. And he sent him a letter going like, "Wow, you guys are really doing great adaptations of these. I'd still like my check though." And they immediately called him and were like, "Wow, we'll get you a check off right away. What would you like? And would you be interested if we did more of these?" And he was, "Oh wow," because he was really excited about that.
To sum up the impact that Bill Gaines had on the comic book world and on what you do, how would you describe it?
Amazing, in that he brought a level to creativity to the work that you hadn't seen in comics before, or maybe since, in terms of the writers and the artists that he was using. And secondly, he did it in the background. I mean, when I was a kid, I knew who all these guys were I was telling you about. I didn't know who Bill Gaines was, other than maybe I'd see his name, in Mad or whatever. What struck me about Bill Gaines, it wasn't until much later I really understood, like, oh, he's the guy who brought all these guys together. He's one of the giants of the industry. It was like in the early 50s, between the comics code and TV, the industry was just plummeting. And he managed to continue on with, like, okay, this won't sell as a comic book anymore because of the restrictions, but it can be a magazine. And not only was it a magazine, but was groundbreaking in terms of, nobody had ever seen anything like a humor and a satire magazine on a adult, and I use that term loosely, level, like what was in Mad magazine.
For our purposes, Grant Geisman is something of a genuine authority on all things EC Comics and Mad Magazine. Grant's written Collectively Mad, Tales of Terror, the EC Comics Companion, and Foul Play, the art and artists of the notorious 1950s EC Comics. Not exactly light reading. Those are big-ass coffee table books that demand a big-ass coffee table beneath them. I would say they're exactly what EC Comics and Bill Gaines deserve, but then I would. Grant is also a very well-known and highly respected musician. He's played alongside Chuck Mangione, Liza Minnelli, Josh Groban, Brian Wilson, Robbie Williams, Ringo Starr, and Paula Abdul. He's written a few movie scores and TV themes too along the way, like the Emmy-nominated one he did for 2.5 Men.
I first saw the name Bill Gaines in 1961. I was 8 years old, and I had already been buying comic books, and some other kids in the neighborhood that were a little older than I was showed me Mad Magazine, and I was like, what is this? I was fascinated. It was, I was only 8, so I didn't get even a lot of the references, but it was just like something so cool about it. And it's like this glimpse into another world, more adult and, kind of, counterculture a little bit even. And I was like, well, where do you get this? I had no idea. And they go, well, you just go down to the drugstore. And I was like, really? They would sell me this? It's like, yeah, it's 25 cents. Just go buy it. And from that minute, I, rode my bike down to the drugstore.
Talk about a drug.
Yeah, exactly. I was buying every issue. That's when I first saw the name Bill Gaines. And then they listed on the masthead who all the editors were. So I knew the names Al Feldstein, and I knew Nick Meglin, and I knew Jerry DeFuccio. And then the artists would sign their work. So I knew who Wallace Wood was, and I knew who Joe Orlando was, and I knew who Don Martin was, and whatever, So that began my fascination with, Mad Magazine, and then a little later also EC Comics. Because in 1964, Ballantine Books, which had been issuing all the Mad paperbacks, from the early comic material, they released, the first one was a compilation of Tales from the Crypt, a little paperback from Tales from the Crypt. And I used to buy all my Mad paperbacks at this place in San Jose called Books Incorporated. And one day at the end of 64, or sometime in 64, I saw this little, next to the Mad paperbacks, Tales from the Crypt paperback. And I picked it up and it was like, oh, I know who these guys are, because I knew them from Mad Magazine. And I immediately understood that this was something else that Gaines had done. And that launched my whole fascination with EC Comics. In 1964, the comics I was reading were a little bit of Marvel, but mostly like DC, Superman, Batman, Tales, what was it called? Strange Adventure. They were kind of tame.
Yeah.
And so these EC compilations that they were issuing, it's like, man, I had never read anything like that in a comic book, snap endings and kind of grisly drawings from Graham Ingalls, and it was just like, and it really aimed at a slightly more adult audience than Superman was, which was very tame, very kind of watered down. There was a lot of gorillas on the cover and imaginary tales. What if Lois Lane, married Superman and stuff like that? So, I mean, this was like, where did
I lost you for a second there, Grant.
Oh, you're back now.
So somewhere between us, the technology died for a moment.
Oh,
But I got almost all of what you said. It was lovely.
oh, good.
It was ideal. You've written how many books about the EC world?
Well, I think it's 6 if you count the compilation that I did with Feldstein on his Junior and Sonny comics, which he had done in the late 40s for Fox Publications before he went to EC. And actually, which in a way got Feldstein the job, because the first stuff from his portfolio that Feldstein showed Gaines were these covers of Junior and Sonny, which were deliberately salacious, and big-breasted woman. They now call them headlight comics, and skimpy outfits and kind of, double entendre kind of stuff. And Gaines was fascinated by that. And he's like, I'm going to hire this guy. And that's how the two of them got started.
You had creative instincts. You were a musician.
Right.
What compelled you to become an author?
Okay. So, in high school, I was pretty good in English, although music was the dominant thing and was really since I picked up the guitar at age 11. That's really what I wanted to do. But I also did other things in high school. I was on the, journalism staff, and I was the page 2 editor of the high school newspaper, and I would write articles, and I was, pretty good at that. I won a little award in San Jose for some article I wrote in the high school paper. So anyway, that was kind of my secondary interest, but the music thing was so strong, I just, full speed ahead on that. But in the back of my mind, I always wanted to write a book about something. I'm also a huge Beatles fan, but there's literally thousands of books on the Beatles. So that's like, who's going to do that? Nobody. So, I had a huge collection of Mad Magazine memorabilia and stuff that I had built up. And I realized there's a book here, waiting to be written that no one has ever done. And I kind of knew Bill Gaines, and I had written him some letters asking him about collectibles and whatever. And so I pitched this idea to him, about a book on Mad and EC as shown through their own collectibles. And so I didn't hear anything. And I told my wife, well, I guess Bill Gaines doesn't like my idea. And she goes, what idea? I didn't tell her. I had sent this pitch letter, and she goes, what are you talking about? And anyway, I guess it doesn't matter. I guess he doesn't like it. So then a while later, but it was quite a while, his publishing representative called me out of the blue and said, we got your letter. Bill Gaines likes the idea. He wants you to submit some sample chapters of what you have in mind. And then it was like, oh, crap. Now I have to do this because I can't disappoint Bill Gaines,
You were assuming that once your letter arrived at their offices, it would go through some normal channel, and there never was a normal channel. It's a piece of paper that flitted from here to there, and God knows where else. It probably, who knows what happened to your poor letter.
Well, I mean, it's just that, I know the Gaines people now, and it takes them a while to do things. So now I understand that. But the point is, when I got the call and they asked me to do some sample chapters, I said, oh no, now I actually have to do that. Before it was just an abstract idea. Now it's like, I have to do it because I can't disappoint Bill Gaines. I can't do that. So I stayed up all night, every night for about a week. And I had a buddy come over and take pictures of some stuff, and I wrote sample chapters, and I assembled a proposal, and I sent that to Bill, and he got back right away, and they said they liked it, and they gave me permission to shop the book to be published. And Dennis Kitchen at Kitchen Sink Press, who's done some very high quality, even EC related books, Harvey Kurtzman projects and stuff. Anyway, Kitchen Sink Press said, yeah, we like it, let's do it. And then the other thing was, it's a huge project. We had to do all these photographs, and I had a buddy come over and photograph hundreds of images. And so now somebody has to assemble that and design it in a book. But, these small press publishers, there's no money in it. So like 3 different designers kind of started it, and they're like, yeah, I'm too busy, I can't do it. And they bailed out. So I finally realized if this is going to get finished, I'm going to have to figure out how to assemble it and design it. So I bought Quark Express and a scanner and a book on Quark Express for Dummies. And I figured out how to do it. And I actually finished putting the whole book together. And that's how it finally happened.
That's a wonderful story unto itself, Grant. Holy cow. Yeah, if you build it, they will come, but you're going to have to build it.
That's right. You do what you got to do. But I actually remember, so I'm sitting there with the book, how to do it. And there was a picture box, empty picture box, and I had to put this image in there. And I read how to do it. And then I pressed, whatever, import or whatever the command was. And I remember watching the picture box populate. I could see it come in from the back, and it was like, whoa, it totally blew my mind.
I'm sure.
Because on the high school the newspaper, it was old school, back then. You'd send up for type, you'd had a little pica ruler, and you'd have to figure out how many lines, and they were teaching you. So if you screwed up, they would just cut your article off in mid-sentence if you didn't count right. So I knew about that and pasting down and all, but to do it in a digital process and have that just come in and populate the picture box, it was like, wow. Yeah. It was so cool.
Yeah.
So then, the first book came out, which is actually this book, Collectively Mad. It came out in 95. And then I liked doing it, So just for fun, I started thinking like, well, what other book could I do? And I contacted Fred von Bernowitz, who in the 50s had assembled this complete EC comics checklist, which listed all of the stories and artists for each EC comic, including Mad and stuff. But it was just a little mimeograph publication, only text, really, no images. And I thought it would be cool to flesh this book out with all the covers in color and have interviews with, different Mad people, Feldstein and whoever. And that was my second book. And I totally designed that one from the ground up, just because I liked doing it, And I actually worked on the book for a couple years without even a publisher. I just figured, well, something will happen. And I just did it because it was fun.
Some of the funnest times I had doing Crypt was hanging out with Todd Masters in his office cum special makeup effects laboratory, trying to imagine what certain terrible things would look like and how quickly Todd could build or create them for the show.
I have really great parents that they didn't require me to hide and read this crap or even make this crap, which is kind of cool. I kind of came in on it, the whole Bill Gaines thing, through Mad, actually, because I was a big fan of Mad Magazine as a kid, and I certainly knew about Crypt and Eerie and the whole thing. I didn't quite make all the connections with Mr. Gaines being so central to so much, but I certainly he was well depicted in Mad Magazine quite often as this kind of like he looked like God with his beard and his long gray hair. And so that's how I mean, Mad Magazine was my art school. And artists like Jack Davis and the list is very lengthy of, the folks that kind of crossed over with the Tales from the Crypts and the Eerie and the Creepy. There's so many great artists that Gaines was able to gather, and they all seem to kind of have a similar, I don't know, not necessarily style, but sense of humor, I guess. Their line spoke of a, it was just joyful, I guess, to look at a Bill Gaines published whatever it was. I look forward to it, and it was just because you could feel it, as opposed to like I don't know if I don't know how you were with Mad Magazine necessarily, but there was the Mad Magazine called Cracked,
Right.
if you remember Cracked. And as an artist, I couldn't even pick up Cracked most of the time because it was a whole different batch of personalities. And there was something just, in the way that they were joking and the intelligence of I mean, intelligence in finger quotes, that they were able to deliver under Gaines was so unique and different, that it was, be cliche, night and day, but it was pretty fucking night and day. I mean,
I think the progression really was from Mad to National Lampoon.
oh yes, of course. Yeah, but I was a youngster at that point.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
Lampoon was what my cousin had, and I would sneak that.
Cracked felt like cheating on a lover.
It really did. That's so true. And they were usually hanging out at the supermarket next to each other, which was really uncomfortable, because it was like, that's the old Mad, and I don't want to. I already have that one, and there's the fucking new bitch who we know is maybe cheaper, but she's just not as good.
The
So
Cracked character they seem to be aiming for Alfred E. Newman Ness. What
yeah,
was the
wasn't
I
he a
mean,
cleaner?
what were they trying to do that Mad wasn't already doing? What new territory were they carving out for themselves that was theirs?
Right.
I think Bill Gaines
Yeah.
had pretty
Well,
much,
I don't even remember if the character had a name.
I think Sylvester something.
Oh, did he have a name? He
Yeah,
was like a window washer or a sign
a
painter or something.
janitor. He
Janitor,
was a
right.
janitor.
And Alfred E.
Something.
Newman, I don't think had a gig. He was just
No, he
whatever.
was anything and everything. He was everyone and he was no one.
Yeah. And the other thing I remember at that age that um, there was a level of disrespect I got out of Cracked, because I was a kid. The magazine in whole spoke down to us with just dumbass jokes, like their style of setup and payoff was almost like Garfield in the sense, or Mary Worth. I mean, it wasn't really that complex. And I know that's because they were kind of thinking that they were somewhere between Lampoon and what was that magazine? Highlights. We used to always see in the doctor's office, So
The
it felt like
highlights for
Cracked was trying to
children.
find this like right. And so Cracked was like, we're gonna pick up the broader audience because we're gonna get all these guys because they're just a bunch of idiots. And
Cracked
Mad was
was
more about
yeah, Cracked was for the moment when you suddenly realized that you preferred Goofus to Gallant.
I just smoked up my nose. Yes, you are correct, sir. Pardon me. Thanks for that. I haven't had a snort in a while. There was a lot of like crossing the fourth wall, so to speak, with Gaines in all of his stuff. A lot of his artists would include like a little commentary about him. Not only depicting him, like there was a lot of illustrations of that, like I said, the godlike character that
Mm.
was Gaines,
Mm.
in a large Hawaiian shirt. But there was also a lot of conversation. I mean, if you followed, like you and I sounded like we were like hanging out together back then. If you follow like every single issue of these things, you could almost get the behind the scenes story between the fights between the artists, the people that obviously were favored, the other ones that weren't. You knew about the hilarious holidays, the group holidays that Gaines used to do. I mean, those were in the pages. They would tease that shit. Occasionally it would be like the joke. I don't.
You felt like
I've
you were
always wanted to do that.
reading the magazine. You felt like you were part of their community.
Well, and not spoken down to,
No,
but just
not at
like
all. Not
exactly
at all.
like you're around the bonfire just chatting with us and telling fucking dirty jokes, and you're not pulling punches because we think you're goofus or gallant. We just know you're fucking Alan and Todd.
They
You
referred to the people who were the entertainers as the usual gang of idiots. And so, yeah, we
Right.
were
And that's the
absolutely,
birth of slob humor.
and yet, of course, the beautiful irony was they weren't idiots. They were quite the opposite. And Mad's readership
Yeah,
really
it's like Monty
was,
Python almost.
yeah. And because they didn't talk down to the audience, and because they were willing to be esoteric, yeah, they kind of informed the audience. Bill Gaines, in the same way that he seemed to attract this incredible, talented roster of artists, it he had the same approach toward his audience. There was no advertising in the magazine. It was all subscription based.
You're right. So
Did you ever get to meet Bill?
I did. I did. I met him in the hallways of the pasta factory during the it was I think near the conclusion of the Bill Tytler era. Uh I was again, I was still super young. I had hair and everything. Um, and I was working on the Crypt set. We had re-erected it there at so we had this place on Venice Boulevard, which used to, this is the top floor of it, used to rent out to productions. We shot Nightmare on Elm Street 5 there, and Monkey Trouble with Harvey Keitel there, and a bunch of other shit. But also Tales from the Crypt season 2 through 3.
Yeah, we were season 2 and season 3. That was the season that Gil and I came aboard. It had been a pasta factory. The A1 Globe company
Right.
had used it as a pasta factory, and then they moved out, and it was
We
always
turned
called
it into a cheese factory.
yeah, exactly.
And so you'd bump into the most random people, like Freddy Krueger there. I bumped into him once in full makeup. I worked on one of those shows and he was walking around, but still, I always very weird memories. And now I think it's just a big mall or something. But yeah, one of the days I was going to Tytler's office and out came Bill Gaines looking just like a Mort Drucker cartoon, which kind of freaked me out. Because I've been saturated with that imagery for so long. And there it was right in front of me, living. And I don't even think anything intelligent came out of my head. I think I'm probably just babbled and probably vomited or something. But I quote unquote, these are finger quotes, met him, but it wasn't like we hung out and talked shop. I think I said, excuse me, maybe, and I'm going to go puke, or I don't know. But yeah, he's like, it was literally like meeting God for me.
That is exactly how I put it. And I say it as a total atheist. It was right? Like meeting God. If that's what meeting God was like, I've had the experience and it's wonderful.
I exactly. And it was so weird because it was so fast for me. I think you had like an intelligent meeting with him. I had like but still I came away from it feeling like I really did have I don't know, I hate to say spiritual minute, but there was, a boy crush at least. I mean, it was really just fucking wow, that's the dude,
Now, Gil had an actual relationship with Bill Gaines. They exchanged phone calls on a semi-regular basis, and they had meals together. And despite all the rough and tumble of Hollywood, I think Bill Gaines really trusted Gil. And that, more than anything, is why Bill Gaines trusted us. Well, that and the fact that though Bill didn't create the Crypt Keeper that appeared on the show, he recognized that it captured the spirit of what he intended. He understood that we understood him, and that was a very good thing. Before you ever met him, when you were growing up, were you in any way influenced?
I don't think I was influenced by him, but I certainly knew of Mad Magazine and loved Mad Magazine. I just thought it was the cat's pajamas. I mean, it was just so funny. It was so irreverent, and adults frowned upon looking at it as opposed to looking at the news. and which made it even more delicious. So I loved Mad Magazine, never knowing about the Gaines, never knowing about Bill or his dad, but loving that magazine. I knew a little bit about the Tales world when I was growing up, but I wasn't, addicted to it. I knew about it. And it wasn't until we got to do the show that I actually immersed myself in that whole world, from the 50s with his dad to the Un-American Committee and him appearing down in Washington, D.C., to all that stuff, which I just found very fascinating, considering we're talking about a comic book. I mean, you're appearing in front of the House Un-American Committee because you publish a comic book. To me, when I was younger and I heard that, I was like, don't they have anything better to do? Are they out of their minds? They're bringing these guys down, that are poking a little bit of fun at the government and such, and they need to have them investigated.
It was the same argument when they said that song lyrics needed to be rated, games needed to be rated, as if the games were the cause of the problem. When you see Tales from the Crypt, the original comics, and then you see Mad, you can still see that there's a certain sensibility that flowed from one into the other. And so when I think about Bill Gaines's influence, it wasn't even, it was really the environment he created for these creative people to create iconic work that Mad Magazine especially was, for me, so much of what I know about comedy is it's either Mad Magazine or Groucho Marx. Those are the starting points.
Well, I think I told you a story once that I went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I was staying in this wonderful little bed and breakfast place, and I saw this artwork on the wall, and I was like, that artwork looks awfully familiar to me. And I was going around the corridors looking at all the artwork and going, wait a minute, I know this artwork. This guy had something to do with Tales from the Crypt or that world. So I went to the main desk and I said to the owner, whose artwork is this? And he goes, well, it's a local resident. I go, a local resident? Who? And he said, well, he's not in Jackson Hole. He's across the border in the other state, but it's only a 15 or 20-minute drive. A guy named Al Felstein. I went, Al Felstein? You got to be kidding me. Can you call him? Do you have a number for him? Can you just tell him that you have a guest who just looked at the artwork, and just tell him my name and see if he would like to meet me, because I would very much like to meet him. So they called Al. At first, Al was very off-putting. He was pretty elderly at this point. But then once they said, well, the guest's name is Gil Adler, he went, Gil Adler? Oh my God, have him call me, give him my number. And we got together, and we had such a great afternoon and evening together, just talking about Bill and talking about the old days and when he worked with Gaines in New York. And they would come out with a comic book almost a day. They would do the artwork in a day. And it was just so interesting. The only thing that was a little off-putting was Al kept saying to me, you see this artwork? You see this artwork? It's all available. And I'm going to be dead soon. And you made a lot of money off of Tales from the Crypt. You should buy my artwork. It's only $5,000 a shot. And we went back and forth a couple of times with him about that. Unfortunately, I never bought any artwork of his, which I totally regret now.
Boy, imagine what that would be worth today.
Yeah, well, do you remember years ago when we first started doing Tales? I'm a big New York Broadway theater guy, and Al Hirschfeld was an idol of mine with his artwork that he did with the Ninas in the New York Times.
Sure.
And he had a storefront in New York on Madison Avenue, and I went in there one day, and Al was there, and I was like, I thought I was looking at a comic book, because he's such a comic character with his beard and his white hair. And we chatted for a while, and I told him about Tales from the Crypt. He went, oh, Tales from the Crypt. Do you know Bill Gaines? I go, yeah, I know Bill Gaines. Of course I know Bill Gaines. So we had this great conversation. Another moment lost. And he said to me, well, I can be commissioned to do artwork. I charge $5,000. And if you want me to do, one of my paintings or one of my sketches, we could bring in you and the Crypt Keeper and Bill and Alan, because I told him about you. And he said, whatever you want, we could do anything. So I told him about Sophie, the dog, and Tales from the Crypt, Tails. And he thought that was hysterical. And he goes, well, I could do a montage for you that. And it was $5,000. And I thought about it and I thought about it. And I didn't do it.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Imagine.
And then when he passed away,
oh gosh.
First of all, I was awful. I felt awful because he passed away. But second of all, I was like, you know what that thing would have been worth today?
Wow.
But you know what it would have been
$5,000 investment.
But you know what it would have been worth between you and me? It would have been worth so much more to have it.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine if he did a thing with the Crypt Keeper, you, me, and Sophie? Because that's what I was talking about.
During the divorce years, it would have been hard. We would have had to cut the thing in half.
No, we would never cut the dog in half. No, we wouldn't do that.
Really, well, visitation rights of one kind or another, then I suppose.
So 2 opportunities that I missed really terribly that I've regretted. Every time I talk about it, I could kick myself in the head for not doing it, But getting back to Bill, I mean, I knew nothing about him personally when we first started the show. I had no relationship to him other than Mad Magazine, and I knew a little bit about him being the editor, but that's about it. But then because of Tales from the Crypt, I got to know a lot about Bill. And I think the thing that we did that was really so good for everybody, including good for the show, was very early on, you and I agreed, HBO was important and they had to approve everything and the partners had to approve everything and everybody had to approve everything. But you and I agreed early on, the only person we cared about was getting Bill Gaines to love it. Not to like it, but to love it. And I remember we had a conversation with Bill where we said to him, we told him that, and we said, so Bill, we're going to give you the scripts before we give them to anybody, not to HBO, not to the partners. We're not going to give them to you at the same time. We're going to give them to you first. And we ask that you don't give them to anybody else because they'll be pissed at us. And I said, but we're doing this because we want to know what you think. And if there's something in it that you don't like, you're going to pick up the phone and you're going to tell us, and we're not going to argue about it. We're going to change it. It's that simple. You have to love this. We want you to have the utmost respect for this show and love this show as much as we do making it.
It had to be right on.
It had to be the whole relationship.
It had to be right on the money. What we were doing had to be exactly his vision, the way he saw it.
Yeah, and I had to love it. And so once we did that, he tested us a couple of times. And we did that. We got on the phone with him and we said, oh, you didn't like that. Fine. And I think what you or me said, well, okay, what about this? And we just brainstormed something with him. Once we made that change and he knew we were real about it and we didn't argue with him and we made a change and we came up with ideas on the phone. We didn't say, oh, we'll call you tomorrow. We said, well, okay, so you don't like that? Okay, so what about if he did this or he did that or he didn't do this? And he was, I love it. That's great. And we did it. And then thereafter, we kept giving him the scripts before anybody. And, that made the difference to the point where we became very close friends. He would come to LA once in a while, not very often. And he would only go to Musso Frank's. I would say, let's go somewhere else. I'm buying tonight. And he would go, no, you can buy, but we're going to Musso Frank's. I go, no, if we're going to Musso Frank's, I'm not buying because we always go to Musso Frank's. He goes, okay, then I'm buying. We're going to Musso Frank's. And in New York, we would do the same thing. I would call up and I would say, I'm coming to New York. You go around. He goes, of course, Sandy and I, his wife, would love to get together with you. We only go to Jackson Hole on, I think it was 64th and 2nd Avenue. And I would say, well, why don't we go there or someplace? No. We only go to Jackson Hole. So anytime I would see him in New York, it was in Jackson Hole. And anytime I would see him in LA, it was at Musso Frank's. And we would spend the whole evening together, and just talking about, I don't know what, nothing and about everything. Politics, our show, what you and I were doing, how we're feeling. It was just a remarkable relationship. And one that I really cherished throughout not only the time of doing the show, but afterwards. And he died. My wife and I were flying into New York, and we had spoken to Annie, Bill's wife, and they were all excited that we were coming in, and we had arranged to have dinner at Jackson Hole the next night, and or 2 nights later. And we hung up, and then the next night, the night before we were ready to travel, Annie called me, and I said, "Oh, how you doing? We're so looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night for dinner," and blah, 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 blah. And she said, "Can I stop you for a second?" And she sounded very serious. And I said, "Yeah." And she said, Bill passed away today." And I was like, "What?" "Yeah, he passed away today." Which just, I didn't expect it. He wasn't ill that I knew of. He was physically a very intimidating guy. He was very, very tall, very lanky, had a big white beard, long white hair. And he looked very intimidating, wore glasses, but he was the sweetest guy in the world. I mean, you could talk to him about anything and he had an opinion about everything. And it was just
before his dad died, he wanted to be a science teacher or something like that.
Yeah. He didn't think much of this comic book stuff. He thought, it was good for his dad to put him through college. It's okay. But then when an American thing happened, then it became much more of a bigger issue. And it wasn't about making a comic book. It was about politics, and it was about freedom of speech and all this other stuff. He got very involved with the comic book.
Did he ever talk to you much ever about his dad?
Briefly, not a lot. We really never got totally into the dad, except he was, he respected his dad, loved his dad. His dad was very good to him growing up. There was no conflict. The only conflict he had with his dad sometimes had to do with politics. But, I suspect we all have that, and it's not only the age difference, but it's just a different time and world.
It's perennial.
Yeah.
I did not have anything like the relationship you had. I am incredibly envious, but the one time I got to be face to face with Bill, I met him in Joel's trailer on the set of Lethal 2.
Yeah, Dick Donner's trailer.
Dick Donner's trailer, and
we were invited for lunch.
Yes, and meeting him actually and getting his blessing at that lunch was like nothing else mattered. It didn't matter what anyone else said, and I think I know I kind of walked around with that. We would get notes from Scott and from Joel's people, and we felt completely correct in turning up our noses at any notes because, hey, we had Bill Gaines's blessing. Fuck you.
Well, do you remember how we got Bill Gaines's blessing at that lunch?
Why don't you tell this story?
So we thought we were going to a luncheon in Dick Donner's trailer with Bill. It would be fun. It would be entertaining. We'd have a good lunch for a change. And we got there and we had a good lunch. And then Joel looks at Bill and he goes, "So Bill, should we get rid of these guys? We could fire them and hire somebody else. We don't need to use these guys anymore." And I know I sort of snickered, like, I'm waiting for the punchline, but there was no punchline. And he stopped talking and he was waiting for Bill to say, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's get so-and-so or so-and-so, And I'm sitting there, I start sweating. And I'm like, wait a minute, have we been set up to get fired? Are we getting fired today? I can't believe it. I enjoyed lunch and now I'm going to get fired. And to Bill's credit, he looked at Joel and laughed. And first he said nothing. And then Joel pushed it and he said, "No, I'm serious. We can dump these guys. We don't need to use these guys. We can get whoever you want. We get big people in the industry." And I remember Bill.
It was one of those things where, Joel is kidding, but he could turn serious in a heartbeat. And something goes, you know what? Fuck that shit. Yeah, okay, yeah, fuck these guys. They're fired.
Yeah.
We can get anybody. Fuck them. Guys, get the fuck out of here.
Right.
Joel's crazy and impulsive, and that's not impossible.
Right. And even before dessert. So Bill leaned into the microphone, or not, sorry, leaned into the table.
They might as well have leaned into the microphone.
Yeah. And basically looked at Joel and said, "Joel, I'm going to tell you one thing. You should sign these two guys for life. They are the best things that ever happened to Tales from the Crypt. I don't want them changed. I want them on the show for life." And I remember sitting there and I'm sweating, thinking, did I just hear what he said? and that was the end of the meeting. And the meeting sort of ended and we went back to whatever we were doing, back to work. I don't remember what we were doing.
It was pre-production on a season. I think it was going into season 2.
It might very well have been.
I think that's what happened. And we were still riding the crest of the wave from Yellow.
Yeah.
Because Yellow was very impressive. Everyone was feeling, wow, hey, not only did we resurrect the show,
right,
but we made the show what it was originally supposed to be, that mixture of TV and movies like no one, it's not TV, it's HBO.
Right.
And so, we had actually accomplished the mission that they hadn't intended us to accomplish.
Well, the one person that understood us and what we were trying to do better than anybody, and the only person that we cared about, was Bill Gaines.
Indeed. And he was a guy who thought outside the box, and I think he appreciated that that's where we were coming from too.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all you guys playing by the rules over there, and we're going to go do our thing over here.
But I remember every time I would see him, he would give me a hug.
Yeah.
And I always felt so small because he was so big, and he was so sort of tall and gaunt and long, and he would sort of wrap around me a little bit, and I sort of get lost.
I can imagine. I would literally vanish.
But I used to love when he would do that. It just was such a great thing. So that was Bill. That was our relationship with Bill. And it's funny, when I think about Tales from the Crypt, I always think about Bill.
One of the things they say is it's the last thing you ever want to do is meet your heroes.
Yeah.
Not entirely true.
Well, I didn't even know he was a hero of mine until we started working together. I thought, okay, he published the comic books. We're going to have to be careful. We're going to make sure. But it turned out to be a real loving relationship that lasted until he passed.
That he enjoyed what we did with his brand and his creation.
Yeah. And that we enjoyed that relationship with him and sharing that with him.
Indeed, one of the most special experiences of my whole career.
Yeah, mine too.
Easy.
Yeah, totally.
What did Bill like to drink?
I don't think he drank. I don't remember him drinking liquor. I mean, he loved the hamburgers at Jackson Hole, as I did, as I still do. And he loved Musso Franks. We would get a prime rib there and a Caesar salad. And it was great. And we both very rarely varied from those things. We would just always get the same stuff.
Well, it's you get there and they hand you the menu and you think about it for a second. Then you go, then I think, God, I got this and I'm not enjoying it nearly as much. Why did I screw with what I know?
After that, I used to go with Toby Hooper to Musso Franks. And then after that, Ernest Dickerson joined Toby and me, and we formed this little club, the Ale and Whale Club. And we would go to Musso Franks, and I would always order the same thing. I would say, tonight I got to order something different. And then I'd go, no, when I was with Bill Gaines, I had this. I'm going to have it again because I'm going to think of Bill Gaines tonight.
What more can you say?
I don't think anything.
I said up top that if there was a real crypt keeper, it was Bill Gaines. I hope you've had a chance to see and hear what I meant. I know as I sat down that very first time to try and channel the crypt keeper just so I could write for him, it wasn't so much Bill Gaines's voice I wanted to capture and stick deep inside the puppet. It was Bill Gaines's irreverence to anyone rich, powerful, and/or full of shit. It's unfortunate that no one will ever be able to remake and update Crypt as a TV series. But hey, on the bright side, no one will go and do a remake that sucks and disappoints everyone. And is that really a bad thing? Hey, see you next time, everybody. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.